This is the Raising 10 podcast with Ed Franklin. Today's guest, Dr. Theresa Lyons, scientist, author, and autism advocate. Get ready for insights that empower families and inspire hope. Let's dive in. Good morning, podcast listeners. This is Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. This is Raising 10, episode 5. I have an awesome guest today, and you're going to learn a lot about something that you probably don't know a lot about, like I don't. This is Dr. Theresa Lyons. She knows everything about autism, or she's going to tell you what she knows. She probably doesn't know everything,
Not
and I've
everything.
never had to deal with this as a parent, but I know a lot of people that have. So, welcome to my show, Teresa. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself before we get running into the conversation.
Sure. I'm excited to be here. So thank you very much for having me. And a little bit about my background is I never planned to be involved in autism and really doing any of the things that I'm doing now. My background is I have a PhD in computational chemistry from Yale University. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry first as a researcher and then more on the business side. And it was really through all of that, so all of my academic training and all of the business experience that I have, that when my daughter was diagnosed with autism, I was able to leverage all those skills and really understand what is autism and what are really the options for my daughter's future based upon real current information and not information from like 30 years ago.
Right. So, very personal for you in a lot of respects, or
Oh,
all
goodness,
aspects.
yes.
Yeah.
I would not be here without my daughter. She's the sole
So,
reason that I'm involved in anything related to autism.
when we had our conversation a few weeks ago, we were talking about, I brought up ADHD and all those things. And when I was growing up in the 70s in school, we didn't have all those initials, right? We would
Yeah.
probably just label someone as lazy or, you know, I hate to say this,
Troublemaker.
these words together because they or mentally retarded or something, because that's what the language was back then.
Right.
And I know as my kids were growing up, that ADHD started coming up and 80, whatever, all kinds of different initials trying to diagnose why a child didn't fit into the normal, I guess, I don't know what normal anymore, but didn't fit into the mainstream, kids with the way they behaved and things like that. And you told me that they kind of gone away from those initials or those, you know, things, and it's now everything's autism, and then there's different severity. Is that fair to say?
So there used to be a diagnosis Asperger's. So
Yes, we talked about
Asperger's
that too.
is what got folded into autism. And so we have three levels now of autism, but it's really broad and it includes people who would be diagnosed level one who previously would have gotten an Asperger's diagnosis and not an autism diagnosis. But now it all falls under one. There still is separate ADHD and ADD diagnosis,
Okay.
but there's a lot of overlap. So it is something. I don't want to say it's common, but it certainly is possible to have autism and ADHD. And I will say, when we work with parents, and this was something that I first noticed many, many years ago, was as children got healthier and were losing the diagnosis, some of the progression is kids would be diagnosed with autism. Their parents would work on, okay, what are the health issues?
Mhm.
And they would lose the autism diagnosis, but then gain an ADHD diagnosis. And parents would continue to do more work, more understanding health and things like that. And then that diagnosis can be lost as well. So it's really important for parents to understand that yes, there are these diagnoses, but and we could go into the science, but it certainly shows there's peer reviewed scientific publications showing that an autism diagnosis is not lifelong for some.
So, and like everything else, there's always instances where a child is misdiagnosed, right? Maybe they jump the gun and they don't do enough research with that particular child. And does that happen? I would assume that happens quite often.
It does happen. It depends on who you're going to for a diagnosis. So
Okay,
I can just explain how an autism diagnosis is made. So
please.
it's based only on observation. right? So there's no blood test, there's no urine test, no stool test. You can't do an MRI and see autism. So that's where it gets very complicated in the sense of who can really make a qualified diagnosis. So typically what happens is you're asked to get a speech therapy report, occupational therapy, physical therapy, some type of educational aspect report from a psychologist or something along those lines. And then all of that information is given to a specialist, a developmental pediatrician, a pediatric neurologist, and they have an appointment with your child, and it might be like 15, 20 minutes. They have read all the reports, and then they look at your child and they concur or not. And that's how the diagnosis is made. So it is very tricky in the sense that there are some parents who feel like, oh, my child definitely should have an autism diagnosis, but the doctor said no. Even in those cases, you, as a parent, you still would want to follow up on your intuition and say, okay, health wise, what are the issues, and work on that at the same time pursuing a diagnosis if that's what the parent really wants.
So it can be really objective. I mean, if you got a doctor on one side and a parent on the other side.
Yes, yeah, that happens too. Sometimes the doctor says there's an autism diagnosis, and sometimes the parent says, I don't agree with that. Right? It's all based on observation, which is, I think it's really hard because observations are interpretable.
Now, do we know as a science community, not we, because I'm not in a science community, but does the science community think that there's something that's changed societally that would cause more autism cases? Maybe food or just, whatever. I mean, does
Yeah.
something cause this?
So yeah, everyone wants to know what is the cause for
Right.
autism. And autism is so complex that very likely there will never be one particular cause for
Yeah.
every person with an autism diagnosis. Right? Because sometimes you have people, if you can just imagine level one, so maybe someone who can dress themselves, make breakfast, live independently, have a job, versus a level three person who might not be able to dress themselves, never live independently, not be able to speak or really have communication. So that is what's under the umbrella of an autism diagnosis. So really being able to come up with one thing that is common for
Yeah.
everyone, it is very unlikely. They did look at genetics, and can genetics 100% explain autism? No, so far it can't. And there's new research that is showing for genetics that people who are diagnosed with autism later in life, so 20s, 30s, 40s, have a different genetic makeup than those with autism who are diagnosed younger. So
Really
the
complicated.
field is starting to really tease out what is autism, and then when you get these subgroups, then that's when you can probably have a lot more similarities in the approaches as to what works.
And I remember some celebrities coming out about vaccines and the link to autism. When we get vaccines as a baby, have you read about that? I'm sure that's crossed your mind at some level, or the science
Yeah, so it's
community,
controversial, and
right?
there's not a solid, concrete answer. So I've worked with parents whose kids have autisms who weren't vaccinated, and I've worked with parents whose kids did have vaccines. I've worked with parents in 21 different countries, so vaccine schedules are very different. So there's very few things that could explain autism in
Yeah.
every single person. What's important is to look at risks, right? So, looking at science, well done science that shows certain aspects of our life increase risk for autism. So, it's not causation. This is risk. So, something like air pollution, that's been well studied, and for a variety of different pollutants, but you can take the very small particle matter, it's 2.5, so you can't even see it with your eye.
Right.
You breathe in these small particles, they go into your lungs, they're so small, they penetrate through your lung, they go into the bloodstream. right? And then that's when you can start to have inflammation and a lot of different health issues. And if someone is pregnant, then that's when it can also interfere with the developing fetus. So there's risks associated with if a woman is exposed to a certain level of pollution in the third trimester, then autism risk increases by 30%. And so, for that same kind of exposure for a child in the early childhood years, if they have that same exposure, their autism risk increases to 60%. So, there are all these different things in our lives that can increase autism risk. And it really depends on someone's genetic makeup as to how they can handle that risk. So, if a child, right, is exposed to air pollution, and you have two children, they're both exposed to the same amount of air pollution, they should have an increased risk, equal increased risk, but one has a genetic makeup that makes detoxing very difficult
Hmm.
and the other does not. Right now the risk might be different considering genetic risk. So this is how it can get so complicated, and how someone in the same family, right? So two kids, siblings could be exposed to the same thing, and one person have autism and one person not. It's because of all these complexities.
Are there is there data to show that other parts of the world have a higher rate of autism than other parts?
There are, so you can look at prevalence, and see which countries have a higher prevalence. Um, but we don't really get into the why. So like in the causation sense.
Okay.
So we it's same like in United States, there are certain states that have a higher prevalence of autism than other states. And then you can try to analyze why, but it's environment and genetics. They really play such an equal role that it's hard to tease out and really generalize a scientific reason as to why.
Interesting. I had a friend of mine that his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She went to get a sandwich at a sandwich shop and called him and said, I don't know how to get back. So they took her to the
Oh,
doctor, and she was only 50 years old. She's
oh
since
wow.
passed away too. And she used to bring her to work. The reason I bring that up is the day that I found out about that, I was driving up to LA for something, and I was listening to a talk show about Alzheimer's, and they said they really just don't even have a grip on what causes it and what how you can prevent it and stuff like that. And there's been more information to come out. It seems that this is kind of similar. Autism is kind of similar in that they kind of get a grip, and then other things happen, and it's like, well, there goes all that research or whatever, because new things come
Yeah.
up.
Well, and that's the problem when you're trying to look for one answer to explain
Well, that's
everything.
what Americans do, right? We want an answer for everything, right? We're probably the
Right.
worst ones in the world.
For a parent who's listening, there's not, don't wait for like one answer for the
Right.
cause of autism, because it varies for each child. And that's really what I've learned over the years of working with so many parents, is to trust the science, but to use that individual as the guide. So that there's certain aspects of health that are really important. And for some people with autism, it's like, yeah, they have, great vitamin D levels, and, B12 is good. And this genetic isn't a problem, but, a genetic area over here might be a problem. So really getting specific and granular for your child is the way to approach autism.
So you're very well educated, Yale educated. Obviously, that's super impressive. You're,
Thank you.
but more importantly than all that education and research and everything, you're a mother, and you've had to deal with this as a mom.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you, do you mind if I open up this, if I ask you these questions about the personal stuff?
Sure.
Is that
Go
okay?
ahead.
So when
Yeah.
you found out, how old was your daughter? It's a daughter, right?
Yep.
When you realized she had autism at some level.
Well, the first doctor noticed something was a problem when she was about 8, 9 months.
Okay.
So he was a very good pediatrician. He was actually my pediatrician. And he said, we're going to have to keep an eye on her because I don't feel her interaction is where it should be. And remind you, like, she's 8 years old, 8 months old. So it's
Right,
it's
right, right.
for me as a new mom, I don't know like what is the level of interaction that really should be occurring. But he's a pediatrician. He sees kids all days and had done so for like 40, 50 years.
Wow.
So that's why when you have kind of concerns, you want to build a team that is knowledgeable because he was able to flag that so early on. Nowadays, a reliable diagnosis can be made at 18 months. So, for any parent who is listening who might have concerns and might be thinking their child is too young, 18 months is the youngest that a reliable diagnosis can be made. And my daughter was diagnosed at 3.5. So I definitely was late to the game, but especially this was about 12 years ago, it was really important to eliminate any other possibility. So, getting hearing checked and, doing all these other things just to make sure, well, it's not this, it's not this. And pretty much we were just left with, okay, it's autism. It can't be anything else.
Mhm. So I have six children and my wife has two children. And so as babies, you're always keeping an eye on your child and seeing if they're walking when they're supposed to, if they're doing all those things. My mom used to say, "Stop, don't hurry the kids to get them walking because once they start walking, they start running, and then that's."
Yep.
But I mean, I have my kids developed at different times, and we didn't have any of these diagnoses, but um, yeah, for a parent to and listen, a new parent that doesn't have any experience with kids, it would be tough for them to even know if there's something different, right? So they
Yeah,
may go to school and
definitely.
talk to another mom or another dad and say, my child does this, or I'm so happy my child's doing this at 18 months, and you're going, mine's not even close to that, or whatever the thing could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but which may lead you to take them to a doctor and say, you know what, I have all these friends that are doing this, and my kid doesn't do it, kind of thing, right? That's kind of a simple way to start to notice something is off,
Definitely. And keeping up with the well baby visits is
right?
important. There's different checklists that the doctors will do. And also schools. So if your child is in some type of day program, even when they're younger, sometimes that's really where that first conversation of, you know, I don't know how things are going with, has their like their teacher or their daycare provider might have that conversation. It's pretty uncomfortable, and a lot of teachers and daycare workers might shy away from that, but they might give kind of subtle hints like, what did the doctor say about her development? That kind of thing. So if a parent really doesn't have that comparison, then they might be, getting kind of nudged along by other people who have it. It is a difficult conversation to have. And again, like a teacher can't make a diagnosis, so they should not be putting a label on your child or
Right,
anything
right.
whatsoever.
So I have a daughter that is a type 1 diabetic, and she was diagnosed at 11 years old. And when we found out, we were like, oh, I don't know anything about this, right? So she went to the emergency room, was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. And then we had to get some education before she got out of the hospital so we knew what to do and how to handle her when she got home. I know that's not comparative, but it's just that shock as a parent when you're like, oh no, I got to, on top of everything else about being a parent, now I have to deal with diabetes. And I was telling
Well,
my son how excited I was about this podcast today. And he says, you know what? Ask her if they treat any of this with medication like they used to give them Adderall or Ritalin or things like that. Are there medications out there that are prescribed if they need them?
so let me ask you. Yeah, you asked two great questions. So I just
Okay,
want
sorry.
to finish
Mhm.
up. No, it's totally fine. So the emotional part. So
Right,
like when you took your daughter to the hospital and they made sure you were trained so that when you got home you knew what to do. And
right.
that does not happen with autism. So if you
Okay,
can imagine, you have all these concerns, you're going through this process, you read these reports. Sometimes those reports say things like, Johnny is 5 years old but has the cognition level of an 18-month old. Right, these are all things that deeply hurt emotionally because that's not the parenting journey that really anybody knowingly signed up for. And then when you start asking for answers and, okay, give me that training, tell me what should I be doing with autism, that's not there for autism. And that just makes that emotional aspect so much more difficult because you're left to just figure it out all on yourself, and you have all these emotions. So I remember getting the diagnosis and crying in the parking lot and then being like, what am I going to do? I was just like any mom would react, just now what.
Yeah,
And it's still the training piece is still not there. And that's one of the reasons why, I started a YouTube channel 10 years ago, is educating the science. And so then that leads into your second question of, medication, right? So the first thing to know is that the latest research shows 37% of kids with an autism diagnosis lose their autism diagnosis. So that was the clinical study that was done, the latest one in 2023. And over the decades, and this is where I ended up starting my research when I was in PubMed, and I'm like, all right, what is autism? What is it like on a molecular level in chemistry, right? I'm a chemist. So I want to know all about the chemistry of autism. And I saw that over the years, it started, with a very small percentage. And then when my daughter was diagnosed, it was about 10% of kids that have an autism diagnosis lose their diagnosis. And that was called an optimal outcome back then. Now in 2023, since that number has increased so much, the scientists are now really referring to autism as non-persistent autism and persistent autism. So there's even that distinguishing in the science now. It will take about 20-30 years for that to become
yeah,
mainstream, but that's what parents don't want to wait for that training, which might happen, not even in their lifetime.
sure.
So that's the important first step of understanding autism. It's not necessarily lifelong for everybody.
So
And
I was part of the reason I started this podcast was so the whole idea. This is what it's like raising kids from a father's perspective. What do we kind of think of? We want to fix everything all the time. We want to say, if I had a
definitely.
child, right? If I had a child that was autistic, well, how do we fix it? Right? That would be the first question you would have. And I was talking, inadvertently was talking to young kids that have babies or that are going to have a family, and they have this perception of how life is going to work when you have that baby. Well, it's never what you think, right? There's always going to be things that come up. I mean, I have 7 daughters and a son, so that's that in itself is a little odd, right? Have that many kids these days and have 7 daughters. My son has 5 boys and a daughter.
Wow.
And so we have all these, and then we don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know what's going to happen, what trauma is going to happen in your life. So adding autism on top of it, which, like I said, like you said, you sat in a parking lot and cried because you're like, now I don't know what to do. Now, so you
Right.
told me this. Now what do I do? How is my, and the kids that I've dealt with and parents that have kids with Asperger's, I always found those kids to be very loving at different level than we'll just say normal kid again. I don't know how to explain that other word. They have kind of a different approach to a lot of things. The ones I've dealt with anyway, the kids. I used to teach CCD at the Catholic Church, and I had a couple of kids that had Asperger's, and they were definitely different personalities than the other kids in the class. And they weren't a problem at all. I just had to, frame questions differently and things like that. And I kind of caught on to that relatively quick. And the parents told me too, you know,
Right.
this child may do this or that, and don't worry about it. It's just what they do. But yeah,
Right.
having to all of a sudden become a quasi doctor when my daughter had, we had to learn how to give shots and measure insulin and do all those things. And there's nothing I have ever done in my life. And
Right.
you had to experience the same thing. Now you have to, there's different areas you have to get into to think about.
Oh
Luckily
my goodness.
for
Yeah.
you, luckily you had a scientific background because you understand a little bit more than probably the average parent.
For chemistry wise, yes.
Yeah.
For parenting, no. I'm I'm learning as I go for parenting for sure. But for the science, yeah, that is what I did, especially when I worked on the business side in the pharmaceutical industry, was I would work in different therapeutic areas and I would have to come up to speed really quickly. So when I was like, all right, and I need to come up to speed quickly on autism,
Right.
that whole process of how does one learn all of this information quickly was something I had done many times. Um, so I was fortunate in that sense for sure. And then just to talk about the medications, if we could circle back to the question
Yeah,
for your
yeah.
son. Um, so there previously, before about 2 months ago, the only medications that were FDA approved for autism were two medications, and it was really more to just kind of calm someone down, right?
Mhm.
So it wasn't helping anything in the long term except for really helping to relax someone. And there are a lot of different side effects with them, but there was nothing to treat the core symptoms of autism. And then about 2 months ago, RFK Jr. and President Trump, they announced that leucovorin is going to be approved for autism. Now, so this is the first medication that has been approved by the FDA to really get at some of the core symptoms of autism. So just to explain the chemistry behind leucovorin, leucovorin is a prescription vitamin B9. And it's been used historically in oncology. Different cancer drugs diminish the body of certain things. And so there was this prescription vitamin B9 that was really beneficial. It wasn't killing cancer cells or anything like that, but it was necessary for some people who were on certain cancer treatments. And what the so the research into leucovorin and autism started almost 20 years ago. And again, like that, it takes a really long time for
Yeah.
things like this to become mainstream. So what was starting to be noticed was that for kids with autism, some of them had antibodies in their brain that blocked folate to be utilized. Now, folate is like, gasoline for our brain. If our brain was a car, right, we need it to vroom vroom to go. And so it turns out about 70% of kids with autism have these antibodies in their brain that block folate from being utilized.
Mhm.
So leucovorin is a prescription that for kids who have this antibodies really makes an impact. And most parents see an explosion in speech, right? You have kids who were maybe nonverbal and they've gone from nonverbal to speaking. I personally worked with a child who was nonverbal, and then 6 months later, it's important to keep timeframes in mind, 6 months later, then was speaking 4 languages. Now, there's so much to talk about all of this, right? So, like, first off, how does a kid go from not speaking to speaking 4 languages in 6 months? The real important thing for parents and doctors and teachers to understand is that that child, as well as all of the kids with autism, are learning all along, that they have problems with communicating. So that child was growing up learning those 4 languages. He just didn't have that ability to produce speech. And once that was resolved, because he had the antibodies and it took time to titrate the medication up slowly, because anytime you're working with the brain, you don't want to just blast it with something.
Right.
And then when you provide his body what it needed, then he was able to show what he knew, which happened to be 4 languages. And I use that just as a way to explain to parents and anyone listening is, and it's something that you saw, that kids with autism, they are learning. They are, wanting to engage in life. So it's really important to presume competence and to just make sure that the child is continuing to be educated, because as different health issues are resolved, then the kids can really express what they know.
Well, that's really an interesting story because in the 60s and 70s, when I was around, we would take a person that wasn't normal, maybe they had autism, maybe they had, and we would classify them as dumb, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are just, yeah, he's just not the sharpest tool in the shed kind of thing. And here you're telling us that here this child was learning all along, just couldn't verbalize it.
Correct.
Or
Correct.
we have these
And
savants that can sit down and, they can hardly speak, but they sit down at a piano and could just, sound like Mozart on the piano. So it's,
yeah,
I mean, the
and
brain,
that's the important thing to
yeah,
to really understand about autism is just because a child might not be paying attention, and you saw it in your CCD class that you were talking about. They might have certain behaviors, and they might just, some kids rock, some kids jump, and there's all these different behaviors, which is very different than when we were going to school. Right, in school you had to sit at your desk, you couldn't move whatsoever. Like, I mean, it was very rigid, and anyone who didn't fit that mold was really shifted out of it. And it's really important for parents and teachers to know that kids with autism are learning. They're able to learn, even if they're not like looking directly at the board or looking at you, or their body is not going to give you clues that they're learning, but they're listening, even if they don't look like they're
They're
listening.
still absorbing information. That's really
Yeah.
the human brain is just
Oh,
amazing. And
it's
I'm sure
amazing.
scientifically
Oh,
we haven't even scratched the surface. I mean,
no, not at
we
all.
feel
Not at
like
all.
I
Our
think the
body is amazing. Like
yeah,
this, the nervous system of our heart, and just how our heart talks to our brain, and just our body is so interconnected. So it's so important for anyone who has an autism diagnosis to really understand how is that child's health, and not just in like are they healthy? No, like really understand the different aspects to health, working with either a functional medicine practitioner or integrative health, and really building a healthcare team so that all those aspects are covered.
so and I'm gonna ask you another personal question. How old is your daughter now?
She's 15.
So when this might be something parents would be interested in. When she started going to school, were you concerned about how she was going to be treated at school and not, and maybe the lack of inclusion and things like that? Did that just our ego, did that bother you that she was going to get treated differently? Did it cross your mind?
I was scared to just even put her on the bus.
Right.
So I just was like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. Did I have concerns that she was going to be made fun of? Not at, 4 years old.
Right.
There was the classroom was inclusion. Um, Kids at that age are, they're pretty tolerable. They haven't really learned otherwise. So I was more just scared of her being away, and would everyone understand her? And she wasn't speaking, so it was really more, not that she would get made fun of, but would she be safe?
Right. So my kids, my older kids, three older kids, went to a very interracial school when they were, and I went to pick them up one time, and they were all holding hands in a line, right? So they were going from one area of the school to another area of the school. And I was watching all these kids, every different color of kids, and going, wow, I thought to myself, we really teach kids how to be prejudiced, right? We teach them later in life how to not like other people or how to treat other people because these
Yeah,
kids didn't care, right? They're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, and they just didn't care whose hand they were holding or whatever. And I think that we're probably getting better at it as a society to include everybody in whatever, right? I think I told you the story about these two kids with Down syndrome at church that would go around and shake everybody's hand, and they would shake probably 50 people's hands before, and it was so endearing to watch and how genuine these kids were and how loving they were. And they'd wear little suits. I mean, they were only like 5 years old, 6 years
mm-hmm.
old. And I thought, wow, we really need to get it together as a society where we're including everybody in what we do, And there's people that need help, and there's people that we can love on and make feel more comfortable in life. So it sounds
Yeah.
like when your daughter went to school, her classmates were still loving and
Yep.
included her in things and such like. It was just you. You were
It
the
was
problem.
me. I was the one who
You were
was a
the
mess.
problem,
Just
Teresa.
like, yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're always concerned about that with bullies and things like that. It doesn't matter if your kid has autism or not. You're always concerned about how they're going to get treated at school, where they're going to fit
Yeah,
in. Are they going to fit in with the
definitely.
wrong people, the right people? There's always those concerns as a parent. And listen,
Yeah.
having 8 kids, some of my kids hung out with the wrong people.
Yeah.
So just
It
as a
definitely.
parent, doesn't matter like if there was anything going on. So
Right.
what is I looked at your website, but you said you counsel kids or parents that are that fall into this area?
We've developed a platform. It's called Navigating Autism, and in it we work with parents who really want to focus on what is the cutting edge information so that they can make really good decisions for their child. So we have 7 categories that we walk parents through, and parents select what they want to do first. It's a circle. The Navigating Autism Matrix is a circle because just like autism is complex and you can't do the same thing for everyone, parents don't want to start doing the same thing, right? So diet is super important. There's great research on science on diet, but not every parent wants to start with diet. I remember I did not.
Right.
So like there was so much stress going on, and then it was like on top of it, I need to change like every single bit of food in my house and how I eat and how I cook and even what I cook on. There was just so much to keep track of. So some parents want to start with diet, some parents don't want to, and we really want parents to start where they think they'll be successful. So, diet is important, a healthcare team, and it's really a team. There's not going to be one doctor that can explain everything and is a go-to for anything that comes up with that child. So we teach parents how do you get a really good team. And there's supplements and prescriptions. So the question like your son asked, and we talked about leucovorin, that was the most recent. But there's a lot of different prescriptions as well as supplements that are important for health. And then how do you even figure out what are the health issues with my child? So we have that organized as well. So parents can order lab tests, functional medicine lab tests through the platform. We teach them what the results mean because that's a huge part, right? Anybody can order a lab test, but then when you get the results, what do you do that is actually going to make a difference
Right.
in that child's life? So we teach that. We work with parents on mindset. So that is something that I learned. I wish I learned much sooner. I wish I must. I was really hard on myself for a long time. So that whole emotional aspect of feeling like you're failing as a parent. I mean, my
Well,
daughter didn't smile at me when
that's
she
interesting.
was
So
three,
did
four
you
years
did you feel
old.
guilty? Did you feel like you did something that caused the
Oh,
autism?
of course.
Interesting.
Yeah, 100%. What did I do? Did I not eat I remember I think I had cold cuts once when I was pregnant, and so I was like, oh, was it? Did I not eat? I was taking my vitamins, but what did I do? So I went through that whole process, and then it was looking out. Okay, the different risk factors. I was a chemist, right? So I was exposed to lots of different chemicals. I worked with carcinogens when I was in the lab, right? So it's like, oh, did I cause this somehow? There's so much emotions that a parent goes through that it's important to feel those emotions, but you can't stay stuck in them. And
Right.
that's really the important part. You don't want to suppress them, right? So if I walked around and was like, yeah, I'm not angry, right? I'm going to explode at some point, right?
Right.
We all know what happens when you try and suppress those negative emotions. So you've got
That's
to
really
really be,
that's really honest of you to say that you were you felt guilty. Now, the
uh,
diet part of it's interesting to me. So my son and I were talking about dieting yesterday during that conversation when he asked me about the thing, and he said, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I don't really diet because I just try to eat right. Right. I try not to eat stuff out of a box. Try to eat. I try not to eat what just kind of simple things. I don't go on it like I don't count calories. I don't do anything like that. If I'm full, I don't eat anymore. I mean, there's just simple things like that that I don't do. But the diet piece of that, what kind of diet is it? Is it high in something higher in different foods or things like that?
yeah. So the diet, it's complex. So there's not one diet that works for
Right.
everybody. And so just to simplify an example, so let's take that leucovorin example, that child who has antibodies in their brain. They need leucovorin as a prescription to help increase the folate in their brain. That child, if they're working with a really good doctor, they'll also be told to not consume any dairy, typically for like 2 years. It would be no dairy,
Huh.
100% no dairy. Because what researchers are starting to see is that there's an association of consuming dairy for some people, not everybody, but for some people, with the consumption of dairy and the increase in these antibodies. in the brains of kids with autism. So diet is related to health, and it's related to prescriptions and supplements. So in that case, being dairy free would be important. It's not that vital for 100% of kids with autism. You can start to look at how your child reacts to the different foods. Sometimes kids who eat dairy, they get into food coma afterwards, where it's like, oh, that's not really the way you want your child to be, right? That shows that the digestion is not optimally functioning. And then there's a lot of downstream health issues that can certainly occur. And the chemistry is there to explain if you don't digest dairy properly and you have intestinal permeability, then what happens is you have these particles that are getting out into the body that shouldn't be and wreaking havoc. So there's a whole host of issues, but not every child needs to be dairy free. So that's the important part to really look at and understand chemistry. Like so some kids with autism, they don't recognize when they're full, right? So there'll be some kids who could just eat and eat and eat, right? And there could be two reasons at least as to why that happens. So one could be a gut infection. So H. pylori is a gut infection that commonly people describe it as having a bottomless pit. So you're constantly hungry. And there's reasons why a gut infection would do that. But so that's one aspect. And then the second aspect is all about the central nervous system. So that communication between the gut and the brain, right? You feel, okay, I'm full, or you start to feel, I'm starting to get full, I should really stop, right? And then like we all feel it when we eat like a little too much and it's up here. So for some kids with autism who their central nervous system is not functioning optimally, they might not ever feel that feeling of being full. So that's where you get into more sensory issues. So you can see diet can get really complex really quickly, and it's not a silo.
Right. Well, it's a trial and error for each individual, right? I mean, that's what you're saying.
Well, no, no, definitely don't do trial and error, right? So
No, no,
if
no.
you
I
want to
mean, you
know,
you have to find out what's best for your child. Each child is different.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes, yes. So you
that's what
want
I
to
mean.
use lab tests. You want to use science to guide
Right.
you. So like the leucovorin example, right? There's a blood test that will tell you if there are these antibodies in someone's brain. So do the blood test. It's not a favorite thing to do, right, on a child. It's not necessarily the easiest, but it's really important to get quality information. And then this way, you're not guessing and you're not wasting time, right? So if I ask you, okay, should your child go dairy free? You might be like, well, I'm not 100% sure. But if you do the frat test, right, and it comes back positive, then yeah, I'm 100% sure for the next 2 years, it's not worth it to take dairy. So you want to use science and intuition to guide you as much as possible.
So it's interesting that there's no doubt in my mind the food we eat today is much different than the food I ate when I was a kid, as far as
Definitely.
preservatives, as far as minerals and in vegetables and things like that. We've depleted a lot of those things, and we're still, you know, and I can tell you that a lot of like I don't eat fast food on regular hardly at all because it just tears my stomach up, right?
Right.
But it didn't used to be as bad for you as it was. And then all these preservatives they put in food to make it last longer, and all the places you can eat out. And there was like I could like a handful of fast food places when I was a kid. There's one every 12 feet now, right? And there's lines out the door to eat there. And the obesity difference between when I was a kid, when I was in high school, there were no fat kids. We were all thin, and now it's much different makeup. So
Right.
I don't know if that has anything to do, you know, in the totality of everything that the food is different than we're eating today. It might be depleting some things in our system. Who knows? I mean, I could talk to you
Well,
about this all day. You're just one
definitely.
of those
The
guests. It's
farming
so interesting.
practices.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so I'm a city girl. I grew up in Queens, born in Brooklyn, grew up in Queens, spent, the first 18 years of my life in New York City. I did not swim in nature. I did not really know anything about farming. But then when I started getting involved in understanding, okay, what is my daughter eating and how was that made? And when I started understanding, okay, how was that cow treated? What did that cow eat? Right. So when you start asking those questions and you start learning, oh my goodness, then I've gone on farms where I'm like, okay, I really want to understand how is the meat being raised. So I, started forming relationships with farmers and understanding how they raise their cattle, how they raise their pigs. And then you could actually taste a difference with the food based
Right.
upon how the animal was raised. So all of these things are super important for our overall health, and they're important for someone who is struggling with their health, whether it's autism or not. If you have some kind of health issue, then you want to really set your body up for success as much as possible, and eating quality food is part of that.
Well, I mean, that just goes back to exercise in general, that 85% of your exercise results start in the kitchen, right? The working
Yeah.
out piece is a piece, but the dietary part is the absolutely most important. And I was telling my son about this study I heard about how much sugar an average American consumes now versus like in 1900. It's like 10 times the amount. It's pounds and pounds and pounds of sugar that we take
It
in.
is.
I used to work for Pepsi and I used to drink a lot of soda. I mean, it was basically free. And I just stopped one day and I don't have maybe five a year now, if I even have that much. So
Mm.
I try to not put sugar. I'm not a sweets person. I'm more of a carbs. I'd rather eat a potato than a Snickers bar. But
Yep.
but I could still kill myself by eating too many of those too. But well, Teresa, you're obviously I love how smart you are. I just,
Thank you.
I love that, and I think that from a religious point of view, I think that your daughter is a miracle, and it caused you to do something and find your place in life.
I
And
did.
I wish you and her the best of luck. And are you married? Not my
Nope.
business, but no, okay. I was gonna go from a dad's point of view, but we're running out of time, so I don't want to get into that. Because like I said, dads always want to fix everything, right? But you're the fixer in your family, it sounds to me like.
Well, yeah, I had to be the fixer, right?
Yeah,
So, but in the sense of I wasn't fixing her. I wasn't fixing her character, her essence, like who she was. I was fixing what was blocking her from being the amazing person that she is. So when we think about fixing, it's not about who the person is, but
right.
about those barriers.
But that's what guys do.
Yeah,
Guys want
well,
that's what guys want to do
sometimes
all the time, right? We want to say,
sometimes moms have to do it too.
yeah, we want
So
to say
yeah,
this is the regimen that I'm developing. You need to follow this regimen. My I always say this, the most amazing thing to me about having kids is they're all so different. And I'm like, how the hell did you all grow up in the same household? And you have different political views and different ways you do things, and you like different foods, and you like all this. When we were kids, it was eat what you take and take what you eat, right? And
yeah.
wow, he can eat a lot. Eat some more, Ed. Show him how much you can eat. And we never did that with, especially with girls. Like when you're full, stop eating. I'll take care of the, we'll take the food from you. I didn't want to put into their mind that they had to, you know, eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and things like that. But
I grew up with two brothers. My
yeah,
little brother is 6'4" and my big brother is 6'7". So
well, my girls
I
ate
never,
like,
when it comes to food, if I didn't go in and get the food, there was none left.
well,
So
my daughters all played sports and my son too, so they all ate like teenage boys. But and
yeah.
then they're all thin, and you'd be surprised how much these kids could pack down. I have a couple kids that love pasta. They can just eat pasta and pasta and pasta, and it just doesn't do anything to them. As they get
Yep.
older, they may want to rethink that whole thing. But
Yep.
I was a very chubby child, and then I grew 8 inches in a year, and
Wow.
I didn't gain a pound. So I went from, my
Wow.
mom would look at me and she goes, "Did you grow again last night?" So I just went "Whoop," like when I was 14 years old, 13 to 14 years old, I gained 8 inches in a year. So
Wow.
And so anyway,
Wow.
well, Teresa, that was an amazing conversation. I think my guests are really going to enjoy this, and I think that there's probably a lot of parents out there struggling that don't even know where to turn. And I'll have your information in a link when I do the description, and of course, I'll send you everything so you can send it out or put it on your website or whatever. But I love the way you spelled autism with the Awetism.
Thank you.
That's fun and different. So, like I
Well,
said,
so my daughter taught me that. So I hated the word autism.
okay,
And it just, whenever I thought about that word, it just triggered in me how difficult things were, how this wasn't what I planned. And there was so much just anger and emotions that would come up when I thought of autism. And then as we started resolving different health issues and she was able to start doing things in life, then I realized, oh my God, like she must have had a headache almost every day, or she had this, she had all these struggles that she had to overcome, but yet she was still willing to get up and go to school and try again, try. And that's really when I just became in awe of everything that she was doing despite the different health issues that she had. And
Yeah.
that's really when it became autism, and it totally shifted everything in my mind.
Well, a couple podcasts ago, I did a podcast about how much we learn from our kids, how to persevere from things, how to lead, be leaders, how to be
Oh
good
my good,
leaders.
yes.
All these
Yep.
things we learn from our kids, and I don't know if we realize that sometimes. I watch my kids now as adults succeeding at a high level in work, and I'm like, wow, I wish I would have been better at that. And they teach me to do things, and I wouldn't even have this
Yep.
podcast if it wasn't for my oldest daughter. So
There
you
you
learn,
go.
yeah, you learn all these things, and it's a good lesson to go back and look and see how your kids handle things and some of the struggles they get through. My granddaughter was just in a play, and I knew it was nerve-wracking for her, but she killed it.
Awesome.
She's doing another. Um, she's auditioning tonight for another thing that's coming up, so she definitely, and she wasn't very good before, but she's getting better, and she keeps it up. And I'm like, man, you can't take away
Persistence.
from her that she's trying really hard. So stay
Yeah.
on here for a second. Let me do an outro and we'll just chat for a
Sure.
minute. So this is the Ed Franklin No Limits Raising 10 podcast, episode 5. My guest, Theresa Lyons, PhD. I'll put her website in the link so you guys can check it out. But I hope you're all having a great week. If you have a guest that would like to be on my podcast, please contact me via social media or on my email. I've told you a million times what it is. But I appreciate you listening, and I will talk to all of you soon. Have a great week.